In Stuttgart, Germany today, former Fox News weekend host Pete Hegseth arrived at U.S. European Command headquarters for his first overseas trip as defense secretary. There, he was greeted by U.S. military families loudly booing him. About 24 people who live at the base gathered to protest Pete Hegseth and his new policies, including his crusade against racial diversity and his scapegoating transgender people and kicking them out of the military. Now, protests by military families against a defense secretary are extremely rare in any circumstances, but it's particularly impressive to attract a booing crowd of military families when you're not even 3 weeks into the job. Well done. Another member of the Trump administration is making his first trip abroad right now. That's J.D. Vance, the vice president. He was in Paris today. He will next head to Munich, where more than 200,000 people turned out this weekend, one of the largest crowds Munich has ever seen, all protesting against that country's far-right nationalist party, the AfD, what Germans consider to be the inheritor of the Nazi Party's legacy in Germany, which nevertheless counts Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Elon Musk among its biggest fans and promoters. J.D. Vance will attend the Munich Security Conference. He'll meet there with NATO allies and possibly with Ukraine's president. On Ukraine, there was reporting last week that we were going to get a big announcement in Munich this week. President Trump has a special representative for Russia and Ukraine, Keith Kellogg. Keith Kellogg was expected to present Trump's big plan at the Munich Security Conference, Trump's big plan to end the war in Ukraine. This big peace plan from Trump reportedly involves letting Russia win, letting Russia keep all the territory it has seized during its 3-year-long invasion. And yeah, sure, that's one way to end the war. But now, despite that reporting last week that he was going to make the big announcement in Munich this week, Keith Kellogg says he's now not going to. Now not presenting anything at the Munich Security Conference. Maybe he'll present something in coming weeks, we'll see how it goes, but he's definitely not going to say anything in Munich. I don't know what happened there. Maybe somebody got Keith Kellogg to Google the word Munich. And what happens when you go there to announce that you've reached a deal for peace in our time? Because you've found a way to appease the fascistic and aggressive country that's invaded its neighbors. They promise they won't do any more. Maybe he Googled Munich. I don't know. Who can say? But have fun while you're there, Vice President J.D. Vance. Try not to let the hundreds of thousands of Germans protesting your right-wing friends get you down. Joining us now is Alexander Vindman. He's a retired United States Army lieutenant colonel. He served on the National Security Council during the Trump administration. He was fired for testifying about Trump's conduct involving Ukraine, which led to his first impeachment. He is now the author of a forthcoming book called The Folly of Realism: How the West Deceived Itself About Russia and Betrayed Ukraine. Colonel Vindman, I'm really looking forward to the launch of this book. Thank you for getting me an advance copy of it. And thank you for being here with us tonight. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Let me ask you.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Let me ask you about President Trump today announcing that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is going to Ukraine, and he's going to discuss pathways to end the war. Vice President Vance may also be meeting with President Zelensky. We did have this reporting that Keith Kellogg was going to announce essentially that the U.S. plan is to let Russia win the war and keep all the territory that it has taken in this invasion. What are you expecting from the Trump administration on Ukraine?
And not much, frankly. I think they came in there with lots of slogans about ending the war. It was supposed to end before President Trump was inaugurated. It didn't end on day one. It's not going to end in the next months, even if the U.S. withdraws all support. By the way, it's putting significant pressure on Ukraine right now and starting to ease the pressure up on Russia, or at least telegraphing it well. That is not a means to end the war. There is no prospect that Ukraine will throw its hands up in the air and give up its territory, give up its sovereignty. The Europeans are there to back them up. The Ukrainians believe that they have the wherewithal to fight on for some time. And this narrative that the Russians are going to, take all of Ukraine is just a false narrative. The Russians are under significant pressure. Their economy is brittle. Their military is taking massive losses. It's a pipe dream. And this idea that Keith Kellogg J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio are going to come up with a plan that caters to Russia is just a mistake. It's exactly what we did wrong. It's exactly what I highlight in my book across 6 administrations, catering to Russia instead of hardening our friends and allies like Ukraine.
As hard-pressed as Ukraine is right now, 3 years into this war, defending its own territory from an aggressive, much larger neighbor that invaded them unprovoked and is taking its territory, Donald Trump today told, or in recent days has just told Fox News that he has an additional way that he wants to press Ukraine. He wants them to hand over $500 billion worth of rare earth minerals. And if they don't, the U.S. will cut off all support. You, of course, famously have witnessed Trump in transactional mode firsthand when it comes to Ukraine. What's your reaction to that news?
This is maximum transactionalism. This is trying to get a deal out of every engagement without understanding the consequences of catering to Russia, of throwing Ukraine under the bus. This is actually not anything new. It's in certain ways quite similar to Greenland. We highlighted for Trump back in my tenure at the White House that the Chinese control the lion's share of rare earths. And Greenland was identified as a place that had rare earths, and therefore he seized on this idea of buying Greenland. In much the same way, I raised the same issue about Ukraine having $37 trillion worth of rare earths. The problem with this idea is that Bassett, the Treasury Secretary, is going there to shake down Ukraine for $500 billion to somehow recoup the costs of the aid that the U.S. has provided. By the way, it's been closer to $100 billion, and almost all of that's been spent in the U.S. on the U.S. defense industrial complex. So I think it's a non-starter. On the other hand, there is potentially something that does cater to Trump's transactionalism, is a kind of a reformatting of America First that puts American security first. And in that manner, you could see that we double down on NATO, we double down on Ukraine and ending Russian aggression. And maybe there's a way to build economic partnerships where we do tap Ukraine as a partner with massive amounts of rare earths that could actually mutually beneficially supply us, build its economy. That kind of deal, maybe that kind of deal that also somehow compensates for security assistance, can maybe appeal to all parties here. This is a needs-must situation. Ukraine needs the resources either from the U.S. or from Europe. And if that's the kind of deal that they strike, that may be reasonable. But shaking Ukraine down, much like in that first impeachment, is a non-starter. The Ukrainians are not going to give in, and this is just not the way the world works.
Yeah, and it's not the way an allyship is supposed to work either. You can do mutually beneficial deals and partnerships of the kinds that you're describing, but extortion is something else, extortion and threats. Colonel Alexander Vindman, thank you. The book is called The Folly of Realism. It comes out in 2 weeks. I hope your publisher is sending you all over the country to talk about this with live audiences. You're a voice that we need back in the country right now. We need your example, sir, and I'm happy to have you here tonight ahead of this launch.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. We'll be right back.